It was a Thursday night, pretty uneventful on the surface. The kind of evening that, just months ago, would have meant us unwinding together, sharing a drink, talking about stupid things like which takeout place to order from or which movie to watch. But lately, those nights have felt distant, like they belong to someone else's life. I barely recognize us anymore, and the truth is, I can't even pinpoint when it all changed. That night, I'm in the living room, pretending to scroll through Netflix while keeping one eye on the clock. Sarah's late. Again. No text, no call. And sure, we're adults. I'm not the type to get all clingy or freak out if my wife's running late. But the thing is, she's been late a lot recently. Every week, it's something. Late from work, last-minute drinks with the girls, errands that somehow take all day. It's the kind of late that doesn't sound like much on its own. But when it starts happening constantly, when it starts stacking up, you notice. You feel it. I hear the key turn in the door. She steps in quietly, like she's trying not to wake me, even though I'm sitting right there on the couch. Her hair's a little more done up than usual, makeup's still on, but not like it was when she left this morning. There's a shift in her when she sees me, just a flash, but it's there. A flicker of hesitation, like she wasn't expecting me to be waiting up. But then, just as quickly, her face smooths over, and she's back to the version of Sarah I've been seeing for weeks now. Detached, polite, almost rehearsed. "Hey," she says, dropping her bag by the door like she's done 1,000 times. Except now, I notice every move, every detail, like my brain's turned up the volume on her actions. "Long day." "Yeah," she answers, too quick, walking toward the kitchen without really looking at me. Late meeting ran over, and I grabbed a bite with Ashley afterward. My eyes track her as she moves around the kitchen, not making eye contact, fussing with random things like she's trying to fill the silence. Normally, I'd leave it there. I'd nod, ask something casual like, "How was it?" and let the conversation fade into the usual. But not this time, because I know something she doesn't realize I know. Ashley isn't even in the country. Ashley, her supposed dinner partner for the evening, has been posting selfies from Thailand all week. I helped her move some of her stuff into storage before she left, waved her off with a "have fun." And now Sarah's sitting here lying to my face like I don't have eyes, ears, or a memory. But I don't react. Not yet. Instead, I play my part cool, casual, like I haven't caught on. My heart's hammering in my chest, but on the outside, I'm the picture of calm. I have to be. This is no time for an explosion. That would just give her the upper hand, make her throw some excuse my way, maybe even gaslight me into thinking I'm the one who's being paranoid. So, I lean back on the couch, forcing my voice to stay steady. "That sounds nice. You haven't had time to relax in a while." She gives me this half smile. Forced, tight-lipped, the kind that doesn't touch her eyes. And it hits me harder than I expected. I've seen that smile before. Not on her, but on people who are done with something, someone checked out, moving on, but not ready to say it out loud. "I'm actually going to stay at a hotel with her this weekend," she adds, completely unaware of the bomb she's just dropped. "Just need a little getaway, you know? Some girl time, with Ashley. In Thailand, right?" I keep my face neutral. My mind is already spinning, running scenarios, calculating the next steps like a chess player planning his next move. She's lying to me again, and this time, it's not some small, innocent fib. This one's big. She's planning something, and I'm not gonna sit here like an idiot while she pulls it off. Not anymore. Sounds like fun, I say, keeping my tone light, pretending like I'm just some dumb, supportive husband. Inside, though, everything's already in motion. I've made my decision. I'm not going to let this weekend play out like she expects. She has no idea that I know about Ashley's trip. No idea that I'm about to turn this whole thing upside down. The second she mentioned that weekend getaway, something shifted inside me. I wasn't going to sit around, play the clueless husband, and let her walk all over me. That wasn't happening. Not this time. If she thought she could lie, disappear for a weekend, and come back like nothing happened, she was about to get the shock of her life. That night, I didn't sleep. My mind was racing with every possible scenario. Who was she really meeting? Was this a fling? Some guy she's been seeing behind my back? Or something deeper? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't some spur-of-the-moment thing. This had been planned. She was hiding it from me, making her little excuses, layering lie on top of lie, thinking I'd never catch on. But I did. I spent Friday gathering every detail I could. First thing in the morning, I called my buddy Mark. Guy's good with tech, a bit of a whiz when it comes to digging up info. We've been friends since college, and I trust him like a brother. I didn't tell him everything, just that I had a suspicion Sarah wasn't being honest with me, and I needed a little help. He didn't ask too many questions, just told me he'd set me up with something by noon. By lunchtime, I had access to her texts and her location. No, I'm not proud of it, but I wasn't about to confront her empty-handed. And sure enough, right there in black and white, I saw everything I needed to. She wasn't meeting Ashley. There were texts, dozens of them, between her and some guy named Dan. I don't know how I missed the signs before, but now that I'm reading their conversations, it's obvious. They've been chatting for weeks. Some of it's casual, but mixed in are the kind of texts that made my blood boil. Suggestive comments, plans to meet up, flirty nonsense, and then, of course, the plans for this weekend. They weren't just meeting for a drink. They'd booked a hotel together, and judging by the tone of their messages, they'd been counting down the days. I could feel my hands shaking, heart pounding in my chest as I scrolled through the messages. The worst part wasn't the flirting, though that was enough to make me want to punch a hole through a wall. It was the way she talked about me, as if I was some clueless guy she had to deal with while she had her fun on the side. Little jabs about how I never noticed anything, or how it's too easy to slip away. She was laughing at me behind my back with this asshole, thinking I was some kind of idiot. Well, if she thought that, she was in for a surprise. The weekend was supposed to be her big escape. She'd be out of the house by Saturday afternoon, leaving me with some half-hearted excuse about spending time with Ashley, probably thinking I'd spend the weekend hanging out with friends or watching football, blissfully unaware. Instead, I had other plans. I spent Friday evening setting everything in motion. Booked myself a room at the same hotel they'd be staying at, same floor even. By a stroke of luck or fate, they were staying at one of those upscale places downtown, and it wasn't hard to find a room nearby. I don't know why, but the thought of being close enough to see it all unfold, gave me some twisted sense of control. By the time Saturday morning rolled around, I was ready. Sarah was packing her bags, not even trying to hide the excitement anymore. She was practically humming while she threw clothes into her suitcase, acting like this was just another weekend trip with the girls. "You sure you don't mind me going?" she asked, pausing for a second, giving me that fake, innocent smile. She was testing me, trying to see if I'd catch on. I played my part. "Of course not. You deserve the break," I said, forcing a smile that felt like it was burning into my face. "Have a great time." She smiled wider, genuinely this time, completely unaware of what I had in store. The moment she walked out that door, suitcase in hand, my phone buzzed. Mark had pinged her location. I watched the little blue as she drove to the hotel, my heart pounding faster with every mile. By the time she arrived, I was already parked a block away, watching from a distance. She stepped out of the car, phone in hand, and within minutes, a tall guy, had to be Dan, was standing beside her. They didn't even wait to check in before they started holding hands, acting like a couple of teenagers sneaking out for their first date. I watched as they disappeared through the revolving doors, heading to their room. I could feel the rage bubbling up inside me, but I kept it cool. I wasn't ready to confront her just yet. No, I wanted to see it with my own eyes. I needed her to know that the game was over, that her lies had run their course, and that she wasn't getting away with this. As I followed them inside, my mind was already racing ahead, imagining how this was all going to play out. She thought she was in control. She had no idea that I waited in the hotel lobby for what felt like an eternity. Time seemed to stretch out, each second dragging longer than the last. My heart was pounding in my chest, but my face, my body, stayed calm. On the outside, I was just another guest, sitting in one of those overstuffed lobby chairs, staring at my phone like I had all the time in the world. Inside, though, I was burning up. Every nerve in my body was screaming for me to storm up to that room, to burst in and catch them red-handed, to blow this whole thing sky high. But I wasn't going to be reckless. Not yet. I needed the right moment. The plan was simple. Mark had hooked me up with access to her phone's location in real time, so I knew exactly where she was. Their room was on the 8th floor, room 824. I double-checked the number, my finger hovering over the screen, every muscle in my body tense. What if she caught me in the lobby? What if they didn't stay long and just left for somewhere else? Too many what-ifs. But I'd come this far. I couldn't back down now. About an hour after she checked in, I saw their little blue dots on my app move. Downstairs, into the hotel restaurant. Perfect. I grabbed my keycard for my own room, 2 doors down from theirs, and made my way upstairs. Room 826. I picked it for a reason. Close enough to watch everything, but not close enough to give myself away too soon. The idea of her coming back to the room, completely unaware I was just steps away, was enough to keep me calm. I waited for about 15 minutes after they sat down in the restaurant before I made my move. With the layout of the place, it was easy enough to avoid bumping into them. I walked down the hall, heart thudding in my ears, past my own room to theirs, and pulled a small envelope out of my jacket pocket. In it, copies of those text messages. Every word they'd sent to each other, the flirting, the plans, the jabs about me, everything. I slipped the envelope under their door and smiled to myself. That was just part 1. I didn't leave it at that, though. I needed more than just a confrontation. I wanted to catch her in the act. So I booked myself a nice dinner at the same restaurant they were at. I didn't sit close, just far enough to see them without being seen. It felt surreal, sitting there, sipping on a drink, watching my wife laugh, joke, and flirt with another man like it was the most normal thing in the world. I watched as they shared a bottle of wine. Watched as her hand casually brushed against his arm when she laughed, leaning in like they had some secret only the two of them could share. And there it was again, that smile. That same tight-lipped, controlled smile she'd given me just the night before. Only this time it wasn't forced. It was genuine, full of excitement. Her eyes lit up in a way they hadn't been in months. Not with me, at least. They were all over each other. It was subtle enough to avoid raising eyebrows from the other diners. But not to me. To me, it was as obvious as a slap in the face. They finished their dinner, and I watched as they stood up together, casually leaving the restaurant hand in hand like a couple out on some romantic getaway. My fingers tightened around my glass, but I forced myself to relax. Just a little longer. I followed them up to their floor, hanging back far enough that they wouldn't notice me, but close enough to hear their laughter echoing down the hallway. They paused outside their room, talking in hushed tones I couldn't quite make out, but I didn't need to. I knew exactly what was going to happen next. The door clicked open and they slipped inside. Now it was my turn. I paced up and down the hall for a few minutes, trying to steady my breathing, to calm the storm brewing inside me. The envelope I'd slipped under their door would have been waiting for them. By now, they'd have opened it, seen the texts, and realized I knew. I imagined the look on her face when she saw it. The panic, the fear, the realization that her little game was up. But I wasn't about to leave it at that. With the hotel hallway dead quiet, I made my way back to room 824. My hands weren't shaking anymore. I was beyond that. There was only cold determination left. I could hear muffled voices through the door, hers and Dan's, talking quietly, almost laughing. They didn't know yet. They didn't know what was coming. I lifted my hand and knocked 3 times. The voices stopped. I knocked again, harder this time. There was a shuffle of movement inside. My heart was beating so hard I could hear it in my ears. But my mind was clear. It was time. No more secrets. No more lies. Sarah was about to face the music, and I was going to be standing right in front of her when it all came crashing down. The door creaked open just a crack, and there she was. The door barely opened a crack before Sarah peeked out, her face half hidden behind the wood. For a split second, she didn't even realize it was me. She was all smiles, the kind of smile you give when you think life is on your side, when you're relaxed, when you're not expecting a goddamn thing. But then her eyes met mine, and her expression shifted faster than I've ever seen. Her face dropped, the color drained from her cheeks. The smile was gone, replaced by a look of pure shock. "Tom? What are you doing here?" She stammered, her voice shaky, caught completely off guard. I didn't say anything at first. I let the silence hang there, heavy and thick, while her mind scrambled to catch up. She glanced back inside the room, probably checking if Dan was in view, as if she could somehow cover up what was going on. The panic in her eyes was like watching a slow-motion car crash. She couldn't control it, couldn't figure out how to spin the situation. Not this time. She stepped out into the hallway, pulling the door shut behind her, leaving it open just a sliver, as if I didn't already know what was inside. "Tom, I can explain," she started, her voice a low whisper, trying to keep things quiet, probably hoping to keep Dan out of sight. Her hand reached out for my arm, like that would somehow soften the blow, like she could talk her way out of this like she always does. "Explain," I finally said, my voice cold, detached. "Go ahead. I'm all ears." She blinked, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. She had nothing. No excuse ready this time, no clever little story to cover up the lie she'd been living. I wasn't giving her an inch, wasn't letting her control the narrative. I wanted her squirming, and she was. "Look, it's not what you think," she tried again, voice shaking as she pulled her robe tighter around herself, like that could hide what she'd already done. "We were just talking, it's complicated. Please, just let me explain." "Complicated?" I cut her off, feeling the heat rising in my chest. My voice was still calm, but I could feel the storm brewing beneath the surface, ready to burst. Complicated is when you forget to pay a bill, or when you have a fight over something stupid. This is simple, Sarah. You lied. You planned this. With him. I jabbed a thumb towards the door, still slightly ajar. "What's complicated about that?" She flinched, her eyes wide and desperate. For the first time in a long time, I saw fear in her. Real fear. Not of me, but of the consequences. Of her little house of cards collapsing around her. "Tom, please, it's not like that. I was gonna tell you. It's just..." She trailed off, looking for the right words, but there were none. Behind her, I could hear movement inside the room. Dan, the other man in this disaster, clearly wasn't going to stay hidden for long. He was probably standing right by the bed, listening, wondering what the hell he'd gotten himself into. I wasn't about to let him slink away like a coward. "Why don't you get him out here?" I said, my voice louder this time, enough to let Dan know the game was over. "No point in hiding, Dan. I already know everything." Sarah's eyes widened, her panic deepening. "Tom, don't..." But it was too late. I pushed past her, hand on the door, and shoved it open wide. And there he was, Dan. Mid-30s, tall, dark hair, standing there in his jeans and a t-shirt like he was caught in some college dorm hookup, not in the middle of a married woman's mess. His face was pale, mouth half open as if he was going to say something. But he didn't. He just stood there, frozen, staring at me like a deer in headlights. The room itself was exactly what I expected. Luxury hotel suite, king-size bed, their bags thrown carelessly in the corner, an open bottle of wine sitting on the nightstand. It all screamed what they were trying to deny. "You two having a nice weekend?" I asked, my voice thick with sarcasm, stepping inside and letting the door shut behind me. The tension was suffocating. Dan didn't move. He looked from me to Sarah, probably hoping she'd somehow fix this, but she was just as lost as he was. "I don't know what she told you," Dan started, his voice shaky, hands up in that defensive posture guys like him always pull when they get caught. "But it's not. Save it," I snapped, cutting him off with a look that shut him right up. I wasn't interested in his excuses, and I damn sure wasn't gonna let him pretend he didn't know what was going on. "You knew she was married. You knew exactly what you were doing. You think I care what your side of the story is?" He swallowed hard, taking a step back toward the bed. He didn't say anything after that. He knew better. This wasn't his fight anymore. It was between me and Sarah now. I turned to face her, and for the first time, I didn't see the woman I married. I didn't see the person I'd shared my life with. All I saw was the lies, the manipulation, the deceit written all over her face. She wasn't crying. She wasn't begging for forgiveness. She was just standing there, frozen, like she couldn't quite believe this was happening, like she thought she could still somehow salvage this disaster. "You planned this?" I said, my voice quieter now, almost a whisper, but the anger in it was razor sharp. "You booked a hotel, lied to my face, laughed at me behind my back. And for what, Sarah? For this." She opened her mouth to say something, but nothing came out. I could see her throat tighten, the tears finally welling up in her eyes. But I wasn't moved. Not anymore. I want you to listen to me carefully, I continued, stepping closer. You made your choice. You chose him. You chose this over us. And there's no coming back from that. Her lips trembled, and she finally whispered, Tom, I'm sorry. Please, But I didn't let her finish. I'm done. The words came out cold, final, and the weight of them hit her like a punch. She blinked, tears finally spilling over, but I didn't care. I was past caring. The betrayal, the lies, it was all too much. Too deep. There was no going back. I turned and walked toward the door. Before I left, I shot one last look at Dan, who was still standing there like a statue, too afraid to move. Good luck, I said, the sarcasm thick in my voice. You're gonna need it. And with that, I left. The door clicked shut behind me, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I took a deep breath. It was over. The moment I stepped out of that room, it was like the world around me finally slowed down. For the first time in hours, maybe days, I could actually think. The adrenaline that had been pumping through my veins was draining away, leaving me with this cold, hollow feeling in my chest. It wasn't relief. It wasn't satisfaction. It was emptiness. I knew what I had to do, but now that I'd done it, I didn't feel better. Just numb. I took the elevator down in silence, staring at the doors as they slid shut in front of me. Part of me expected her to come running after me, but I knew better. Sarah was probably still up there, crying, maybe still trying to wrap her head around what just happened. But no amount of tears was going to fix this. Not after what I saw. Not after the lies. The lobby was a blur of people. Guests checking in, couples laughing, families dragging luggage, but I moved through it like a ghost. My mind was elsewhere. I pushed through the revolving doors and out into the cool night air. The city lights flickering above me like nothing had changed, even though everything had. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but I didn't bother looking. I knew it would be her. Maybe she texted me some half-assed apology or tried to call. I didn't care. I walked. I didn't know where I was going, but I needed to move, needed to feel something other than the weight of what had just happened. The sounds of the city wrapped around me. Honking cars, voices, footsteps, but it all felt distant, like I was walking through someone else's life. After a while, I found myself at a small park, benches scattered around and trees lining the walkway. It was quiet here, at least, away from the chaos of the hotel, away from the mess I'd just left behind. I sat down on a bench, staring at the empty path ahead of me, my thoughts finally catching up with me. 6 years. 6 goddamn years, and it had all led to this. How the hell did we get here? I pulled my phone out, stared at the screen for a moment before unlocking it. There it was, her name, flashing up with a missed call and a couple of texts. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the message icon, before finally opening it. Tom, please, can we talk? I'm sorry. I need to explain. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Please don't leave things like this. We can fix it. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I almost laughed. Didn't mean for it to go this far? What the hell did she mean by that? Like there was some acceptable level of cheating where things could have stayed okay between us? I shoved the phone back into my pocket, disgusted by the thought. There was no fixing this. There was no version of our life where what she did could be excused, explained, or forgiven. But even as I sat there, alone, I couldn't stop the memories from flooding in. The good ones. The moments where we were happy, really happy. Those early years when we couldn't get enough of each other. When we'd stay up late just talking about nothing and everything. The way she used to look at me, like I was the only person in the world that mattered. Where the hell did all of that go? When did she start looking at me like I was invisible, just a roadblock in her life instead of her partner? The numbness in my chest was giving way to something darker. Anger. Not the kind of explosive anger I felt back in that hotel room, but something deeper. A slow burn that settled in my bones and refused to leave. How long had this been going on? How long had she been lying to me, pretending everything was fine while she was sneaking around with this other guy? Every time I tried to replay it in my head, it made me sicker. My phone buzzed again, snapping me out of my thoughts. Another message. This time, I couldn't stop myself from looking. Tom, I'm so sorry. Please, I don't want to lose you. It was a mistake. Just one. We can talk about it, I swear. Please come back. Let me explain. A mistake. One mistake. As if that made it better. I thought about it for a second, her pleading, her desperation to talk. What was there to explain? That it was just a fling? That she wasn't really serious about Dan? That somehow this didn't change everything between us? She was grasping at straws, trying to salvage what she could because now she realized the stakes. Now that her comfortable little life was slipping away, she was panicking. But the truth was, this wasn't just one mistake. It wasn't about Dan. It was about the fact that she'd planned it, lied to my face, and laughed at me behind my back. It wasn't the act itself that destroyed us. It was the betrayal. The way she looked at me like I was some oblivious fool while she snuck around with him. That was something I couldn't forgive. I sat there for a long time, staring at the path in front of me, trying to figure out what to do next. Part of me wanted to respond, to hear her out, to maybe find some closure. But the other part, the smarter part, knew that it wouldn't change anything. No explanation was going to make this better. No apology was going to erase what she'd done. Finally, I stood up, the decision weighing heavily on my shoulders but clear in my mind. I wasn't going back. I wasn't going to listen to her lies anymore. There was nothing left for me in that hotel, in that room, or with her. I walked away from the park, pulling out my phone one last time to send her a message. A message that would make things clear, final. We're done, Sarah. There's no fixing this. Don't contact me again. I hit send and turned off my phone. The cold air cut through me as I walked into the night, but it didn't matter. I'd made my choice. It was over. For real this time. The next morning felt like waking up in a different world. I hadn't gone home. Couldn't. Instead, I found myself in a dingy little motel on the outskirts of town, staring at the cracks in the ceiling, wondering how the hell my life had ended up here. My phone was still off, lying face down on the nightstand like a ticking bomb I refused to acknowledge. I knew what would be waiting for me if I turned it on. More of Sarah's desperate messages, more pleas for forgiveness. But I wasn't ready to face it. Not yet. The room was suffocating. The air felt thick, heavy with the weight of everything that had happened the night before. I needed to move, to get out of my own head before I drove myself insane with all the what-ifs and questions swirling around in my mind. So I got up, threw on some clothes, and went for a drive. No destination in mind, just the open road, letting the motion and the hum of the engine drown out the noise in my head. The world outside seemed indifferent to the chaos inside me. People were going about their day, kids waiting for school buses, shops opening up, couples walking down the street like it was just another ordinary day. It was surreal. My entire life had imploded, and yet the world kept spinning, oblivious. I drove for hours aimlessly until I ended up at the edge of the city near the river. I pulled over, got out, and sat on a bench overlooking the water. The river was calm, steady, the opposite of everything I was feeling. I stared at it, trying to find some sense of peace, some way to steady myself. But the questions kept creeping back in, the ones I'd been avoiding since I walked out of that hotel room. How long had she been doing this? How many times had she lied to me, looked me in the eyes, and pretended everything was fine while she was off with him? Or worse, were there others before Dan? Had this been going on longer than I even realized? My mind started spiraling, the paranoia gnawing at me, feeding off the uncertainty of it all. That was the worst part, not knowing. I thought back to the day we got married. It wasn't a big ceremony, just close friends and family, but it felt perfect. I remember looking at Sarah that day, standing there in her dress, thinking she was the love of my life, that we had something real, something solid. I believed in us, and she'd stood there, smiling, saying vows that apparently meant nothing. She had looked at me with those same eyes she'd used to lie to me for God knows how long. I didn't even know who she was anymore. As the hours passed, I tried to make sense of it. What I was supposed to do now? Divorce? Obviously, there was no coming back from this. No matter how much she begged or cried, no matter what excuse she came up with, I couldn't trust her. She had broken something fundamental between us, something that could never be repaired. But even knowing that, the idea of tearing our lives apart, of unraveling the years we'd spent together, was more painful than I'd expected. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have the energy to think about lawyers or paperwork or any of that. All I knew was that I couldn't go back to the life we had. Not after what she'd done. After what felt like forever. I finally reached into my pocket and turned my phone back on. The screen lit up with notifications, missed calls, texts, voicemails. All from her. Each one a punch to the gut. I scrolled through them, skimming without really reading. Tom, please talk to me. I need to explain. I'm so sorry, you have to believe me. We can fix this. Don't throw everything away because of one mistake. One mistake. She kept calling it that, like it was some kind of slip-up, something she could sweep under the rug if she apologized enough. But this wasn't a mistake. This was a choice. A series of choices, each one a knife in the back of our marriage. She had chosen him. She had chosen to lie. And now she was trying to backpedal, trying to undo what she knew was coming. One message stood out from the rest, sent just a few hours ago. Tom, please. I'm at home. I can't stop crying. I don't know what to do without you. Please come back. We can talk. I'm begging you. I stared at the message, my thumb hovering over the screen, debating whether to respond. She sounded desperate, broken even. The part of me that had loved her for years, the part that remembered all the good times, all the laughter, all the moments where I thought we were untouchable. That part of me almost wanted to go back. Almost. But I couldn't. I knew that deep down I couldn't. There was no we anymore. Not after this. I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat and sat there for a while, staring at the dashboard, letting the reality of it all sink in. I wasn't going back to that house. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of a conversation, of hearing her excuses, her apologies, her empty words. There was nothing left to say. Eventually, I started the car and headed back to town. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't just sit in the silence anymore. As I drove, I thought about the next steps, about moving out, finding a lawyer, starting the paperwork, all the logistical stuff that I'd have to deal with sooner or later. But even thinking about it made me feel like I was walking through someone else's life. Like none of this was real, but it was. By the time I pulled into the driveway of my own house, it was late afternoon. The sun was starting to dip, casting long shadows across the yard. I didn't want to go inside. I didn't want to face her, but I had to get my stuff. I had to make it clear that this was the end. The front door creaked as I stepped inside, and immediately I heard her. Soft, broken sobs from the living room. She hadn't heard me come in, and I stood there for a moment, staring at her from the doorway. She was curled up on the couch, knees pulled to her chest, looking as small and fragile as I'd ever seen her. She didn't look like the Sarah I knew. She looked like a stranger, a shell of the woman I once thought I loved. Her head snapped up when she saw me, eyes wide and red from crying. "Tom!" she whispered, her voice barely audible. She looked at me like I was her last hope, like I was the only thing keeping her from falling apart completely. But I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just stood there, looking at her, feeling nothing. "Please," she whispered again, standing up slowly, her hands shaking as she reached out toward me. "Please don't leave. I can't. I don't know what to do without you. I made a mistake, but I love you, Tom. I love you so much. We can fix this. We can get through this. Please." I shook my head slowly. "There's nothing to fix, Sarah." The words hit her like a blow, and she crumpled, sinking back onto the couch, sobbing into her hands. It should have hurt to see her like that. It should have torn me apart. But it didn't. All I felt was the weight of finality, of knowing that this was the end, that we were done. Without another word, I turned and walked upstairs to pack my things. Upstairs, the house felt like a mausoleum, quiet, heavy, filled with ghosts of what used to be. I walked down the hallway to our bedroom where everything still looked the same. The bed we'd shared for years was neatly made, untouched since the morning before. Her side of the room was littered with little pieces of her. Scarves tossed over the chair, books piled on the nightstand, the scent of her perfume still hanging faintly in the air. I hated that it still smelled like her. I grabbed a duffel bag from the closet and started packing. Clothes, toiletries, the essentials. My movements were slow, mechanical, like I was watching someone else's life from the outside. Every item I tossed into the bag felt like another nail in the coffin of our marriage. The silence of the house was deafening, broken only by the occasional creak of the floorboards and the distant sound of Sarah crying downstairs. I tried to block it out, but it was impossible. I zipped up the bag and paused, staring at the reflection in the mirror across from the bed. I looked at myself, really looked, and saw a man I didn't recognize anymore. Tired, hollow, angry. The face staring back at me was someone who had just seen his life dismantled in front of him, and I couldn't help but feel like I was still trying to catch up to the reality of it. I glanced at the dresser, at the photo of us sitting there taken just a few years ago. We were laughing, arms around each other, eyes full of that blinding love you think will last forever. I remember the day so clearly. It was our anniversary trip to the mountains, and we'd spent the whole week hiking, talking, reconnecting. I thought that version of us was unbreakable. I was wrong. My eyes burned, and I quickly turned away from the photo, yanking the drawer open to grab the last of my things. There was no point in looking back. That version of us was dead. I slung the duffel bag over my shoulder and took one last look around the room, the place where we'd shared so many moments, good and bad. But now it felt like a stranger's house. I didn't belong here anymore. I walked downstairs, and the sound of my footsteps must have alerted Sarah because I heard her stir in the living room. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, she appeared in the doorway, her eyes red and swollen from crying, her hair a mess. She looked at me with the desperation of someone drowning, like I was her last chance to survive. But I couldn't be that for her anymore. "Tom," she started, her voice hoarse and trembling. "Please, don't go. Just stay. We can talk. We can work through this. I'll do anything, I swear. I know I messed up, but please don't leave." Her words hung in the air like a weight, heavy and suffocating. I stared at her, taking in the sight of the woman I'd built a life with, the woman I'd once loved more than anything. And I felt nothing. It was like the connection between us had been severed completely, leaving me empty. "I already told you," I said quietly, my voice steady but cold. "There's nothing left to say. You made your choice, Sarah, and I'm making mine." She took a shaky step forward, reaching out as if to touch me, to somehow pull me back into the life we'd shared. But I didn't move. "Tom, I'm begging you. Please don't throw everything away. I'll do whatever it takes. Therapy, counseling, anything. Just give us another chance." Another chance. How many chances had I given her already? All those times I'd brushed off the red flags, ignored the growing distance between us, convinced myself that things would get better. I'd given her more chances than I even realized. And this wasn't something you could fix with therapy or counseling. This was betrayal, plain and simple. I shook my head, taking a step back. "It's too late, Sarah." Her face crumpled, and she started sobbing again, collapsing onto the floor as if the weight of my words had physically knocked her down. "Please, I love you. I love you," she choked out between sobs, clutching at the hem of my jeans like she was holding on for dear life. I stared down at her, feeling a pang of something. Maybe pity, maybe sadness, but it wasn't enough to change anything. It wasn't enough to fix what she'd broken. I pulled my leg free from her grip and walked to the door. My hand hesitated on the handle for a moment, and I looked back at her one last time, her body curled up on the floor, her sobs filling the room. I thought maybe I'd feel something, regret, guilt, something that would make me reconsider. But I didn't. "I loved you too," I said quietly, the words slipping out before I could stop them. "But you destroyed that." And with that, I opened the door and stepped outside, the cool air hitting me like a wave, washing over me. The door clicked shut behind me, sealing off the life I had known for years. I stood there for a moment, staring out at the street, the world outside unchanged, moving on as if nothing had happened. But for me, everything had changed. I had walked out of that house a different person than the one who had walked in. I had left behind the woman I thought I'd spend the rest of my life with, left behind the dreams, the plans, the future we'd built together. As I made my way to the car, I felt the weight lift, slowly, painfully, but surely. Every step away from that house was a step toward something else, something unknown, something new. I threw my bag in the back seat and climbed into the driver's seat. Sitting there for a moment in silence, the engine off, the quiet of the neighborhood wrapping around me like a blanket. My hands gripped the steering wheel, and I took a deep breath, letting it out slowly. And then, without looking back, I turned the key, pulled out of the driveway, and drove away. There was no going back now. The road ahead was uncertain, and I had no idea where I was headed, but I knew one thing for sure. I was free. The next few days were a blur. Leaving Sarah felt like ripping off a bandage. Quick, painful, but necessary. The real pain, though, came afterward when everything settled in. There was no turning back. No more pretending. My marriage was over, and I had to figure out what life looked like without her in it. I stayed with Mark for a few nights. He didn't ask many questions, which I appreciated. Just threw me a beer, gave me a place to crash, and kept the TV on loud enough to drown out any awkward silence. But even with the distraction, the quiet moments hit hard. Lying on his lumpy couch, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. Every thought led back to Sarah, how things went so wrong, what I could have done differently, and why I hadn't seen it sooner. Eventually, I had to stop running from the practical stuff. There was a house to deal with, bills, a life to untangle. I couldn't just hide out at Mark's forever. So on the fourth day, I took a deep breath and called a lawyer. That was when it became real. Sitting in that lawyer's office, hearing terms like division of assets, spousal support, and property settlement, it hit me like a punch in the gut. Everything we had built together was now being picked apart like pieces of furniture at a yard sale. The house, our savings, even the damn dog. It was all going to be negotiated, fought over, divided until there was nothing left but scraps of what we used to be. I thought back to that night in the hotel, the look on Sarah's face when I confronted her, the way she crumbled when I walked out the door. Part of me wanted to be angry, to hold on to the rage that had driven me to leave in the first place. But the anger was fading, replaced by something else. Something heavier. Sadness. Grief even. I wasn't grieving her, though. I was grieving the life we had before it all fell apart. The version of us that felt safe, unbreakable. I realized I wasn't just mourning the betrayal. I was mourning the death of everything we'd planned together. When the lawyer asked me what I wanted out of the divorce, I sat there for a long moment, staring at the papers in front of me, the cold legal terms blurring on the page. What did I want? I wasn't sure anymore. Closure, maybe. Peace. I wanted to feel like myself again, without the weight of all of this pressing down on me. I don't care about the stuff, I said finally. Just make it clean. Quick. I just want out. The lawyer nodded, scribbling notes, and I sat back in the chair, feeling drained. It was like a marathon I hadn't trained for. Every step forward felt heavier than the last, but I kept moving because stopping wasn't an option. After the meeting, I drove back to the house. I hadn't been back since that night. I had avoided it like the plague, not wanting to face the memories that would hit me the second I stepped inside. But I had to get the rest of my things. The door felt heavier than usual as I unlocked it, the quiet inside swallowing me up the moment I crossed the threshold. The place was spotless, almost eerily so. Sarah must have cleaned up, trying to create some sense of normalcy in the wake of everything. But the emptiness was palpable. The house, once filled with life, felt hollow. I walked through the rooms, each one a reminder of what used to be. Our framed photos still hanging on the walls, the dent in the couch where we used to sit together, the kitchen where we'd shared countless late-night conversations. I made my way upstairs to the bedroom, my duffel bag slung over my shoulder, ready to pack the rest of my stuff. That's when I noticed it. The note. It was sitting on the bed, folded neatly in half. My name scrawled across the front in Sarah's familiar handwriting. I stared at it for a long time before picking it up. My chest tightened as I unfolded the paper, bracing myself for whatever she had written. Tom, I know you probably don't want to hear from me. I don't deserve your forgiveness, and I understand if you never want to speak to me again. But I need you to know that I'm sorry, truly. Not just for what I did, but for how I let things get to this point. I was selfish. I took you for granted. And I ruined the best thing that ever happened to me. I'm not asking for another chance. I know I've lost that. But I do want you to know that I loved you. I still do, in a way I probably didn't even realize until I lost you. I know you'll never believe me after what I did, but I'm telling the truth. I'm sorry for everything. I hope someday you find happiness again. The kind you deserve. The kind I couldn't give you. Sarah. I stood there, holding the note in my hands, unsure how to feel. The apology was there, laid out in front of me, but it didn't give me the closure I thought it would. It didn't undo the damage. It didn't erase the betrayal. I sat down on the edge of the bed, staring at the words, trying to make sense of the knot of emotions twisting in my chest. Part of me wanted to hate her for what she did. Part of me wanted to believe that she was telling the truth, that she was genuinely sorry. But mostly I just felt tired. Tired of the lies, the hurt, the constant replaying of events in my head. There wasn't going to be a clean ending here. No neat bow to tie everything up. No big moment of clarity. Just a slow, painful process of moving on one day at a time. I folded the note and tucked it into my bag, stood up, and started packing the rest of my things. It was time to go. Time to leave this house, this life, and everything that came with it behind. As I carried my bag down the stairs and out the front door, I took one last look at the house. The door closed behind me with a soft thud, and I walked to my car, the weight of finality settling over me. I didn't look back as I drove away. This time, the road ahead didn't feel so uncertain. It felt open, wide, and waiting. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again. I didn't know what was next, but I knew one thing for sure. I was ready to find out.